Hello, and welcome to Party Select, a podcast where two dudes and a guy who's their friend talk about the best thing there is, video games. My name is Shea. I'm going to be your host today. I'm joined, as always, by Kyle and Cody. And guys, before we dive in, we got a very special episode 0 of the podcast. But before we get into it, I have to ask a quick question. Okay. I am rocking my Mario Kart shirt today.
Okay.
And so I want to start us off with one of the most important questions you can ask. A great icebreaker for corporate events, parties, wherever you might be.
Okay.
Who were you guys choosing in Mario Kart? You've got the full roster. Who's your go-to? Kyle, you start.
All right. I'm going to assume that I'm playing Mario Kart Double Dash, the only one I like. It's going to be Toad.
I'm pretty sure the roster is like the same across almost every game.
But it's Toad and Toadette. And I'd say Double Dash because it's two characters. So Toad and Toadette.
Yes. Why? Why is that?
Not that it makes a gameplay difference, but I feel like their small stature allows them to be faster.
Yeah. And maybe like shrinks the hitbox, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Like mentally.
Totally.
That makes sense. Cody, how about you?
I usually gravitate, and this goes for pretty much any Mario game when you get to choose who you play as. I like the tertiary enemy characters. So I like the Shy Guy, the Dry Bones, Boo when he's available.
Oh yeah.
I like the little villains because they get there. It's like the only opportunity you have to play is those guys.
So you got a mean streak. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Well,
yeah, I'm nasty on those cards too.
Yeah.
You're nasty on the track, bro.
That's right.
Mine is probably also mean streak. I usually default to the biggest characters because I want to bully other racers. Yeah. So King Boo, Bowser, DK, the big guys are my go-to.
All right.
I like the big characters, the big carts, the big wheels. And I'm just going to push. Baby Mario, get out of here, man.
Squashed.
I'm going to knock you out of that
such
little
a
crib
good
you're
big
riding
brother.
Maybe it's my short man syndrome coming out. It's my insecurities manifesting by playing as the giant Donkey Kong character.
Yeah.
But yeah, welcome everybody. Welcome to Party Select. This is our first episode. We're technically calling it episode 0 because it's not actually our launch episode, but we wanted to do a mini episode just to introduce y'all to us, but nothing is ever going to be mini when you're listening to Party Select because we chit chat, right? We're going to talk. And so this is probably not going to be a mini episode, but we wanted to find a way to introduce ourselves, introduce the podcast, some of the content you should expect to see on the channel. You should subscribe on YouTube, see our beautiful faces and some great layout work, some great branding. Mwah, the marketer in me is very happy.
So good.
But for this, we wanted to talk about what is Party Select? Why is Party Select? And that's not rhetorical. I don't even know. Why are we doing this podcast?
We haven't talked about it.
Nobody asks how Party Select is doing. It's always what is Party Select.
It's always what is and not how is. Oh man, that hits.
Always.
Yeah, speaking for myself, podcasting is a thing that I've always enjoyed doing. Talking about video games is a thing I've always enjoyed doing. And talking with you two dudes is a thing I've always enjoyed doing. Kyle and I had a podcast, which if you're listening and subscribed through the podcast feeds, it was our preceding podcast. We just changed the name and the branding. You can go listen to those episodes if you want, called the Shea Hits Everything podcast. We did it on and off for 6 years.
Yeah, it was a while.
And it was just a good time. And we wanted to shake it up and do something different, expand it. And so we invited Cody, and inviting Cody also turned into, let's blow this whole thing up. Let's start from scratch and make a new thing.
Because I don't hate everything.
That's true.
That is.
I don't hate anything anymore. I was not a parent when we started Shea Hates Everything. Yeah. Now I've got 2 kids. I can't hate everything anymore. It's the law.
Because at a minimum, you gotta like them, right?
Yes, exactly. If I hate my kids, bad things will happen to me.
That's a lot of pressure.
It
on
is.
Both the kid and the parent.
Yeah.
You know what? I rise to the occasion. I created this problem by choosing to have children so that I can overcome it and treat myself like a hero. You know? I created a problem so that I can solve it myself.
Wow.
Typical.
All the best men do.
But that's what I think, like, the direct story of what created Party Select is about.
Yeah, that's
but more
right.
holistically, you know, from you guys, like, why do this? There are many things a man or person can do with their time. Why this? Why do Party Select?
Yeah, that's
because I asked you.
So part of it was I was strong-armed into doing this by Shea, because I like you and I are brothers, and I was obliged to participate in your previous podcast venture, the Shea Hates Everything podcast. And
this is gaslighting.
This is really rude.
This is not true.
So, like, for me, the Shea Hates Everything podcast was a way for you and I to stay in touch, because we are both the kind of people who, out of sight, out of mind, and our connection as brothers, we care a lot about each other and love each other, and neither of us wanted that relationship to deteriorate due to distance, because you had moved away several years prior. And you know, some other, like, a lot of life stuff was happening, and so we wanted a way to keep in touch and connect on the thing that you and I share the most in common with, which is our love for video games. And so, like, that's kind of where it started, right? The impetus behind that. Plus, we enjoy production, and you have a great penchant for marketing and stuff. And so, like, using this as an opportunity to develop those skills was a big part of the Shea Hates Everything podcast. But it became... And we were still really enjoying doing that, but it has, like you mentioned, it reached the point where we felt like it was time to take it to the next level and figure out what that was. And, you know, we had a group chat with Cody, who's an awesome friend of mine. And since you and I are brothers, like, you have known Cody for a super long time as well. And so it just made a lot of sense to bring Cody in as the third person, to share this with, because, like, we have had an ongoing video game related dialogue for years, and that was always the struggle with the Shea Hates Everything podcast, was like, how do we insert another voice into this,
right?
Like who would we want to saddle with? I was trying not to say it like an asshole, but you managed to find
I read your mind.
Yeah, no, that's great. But yeah, it became a really difficult question, and a lot of it was because of the framing of it and the format of it being Shea Hates Everything. Two brothers are doing this thing. Like, where is the space for a third person or another voice? And so, the rebrand made a lot of sense. It was also something, like I mentioned, we like to all three of us really like to stretch our creative muscles and collaborate and create things. And you know, it was born out of all of those things, right? This desire to maintain connected, desire to continue talking about video games, you know, keep our relationships healthy, keep the discourse flowing, and create the kind of space in games criticism, in games discussion, that, you know, foster the kinds of conversations that we have between the three of us, foster them with a greater community. And so that's, you know, that's kind of the various things behind what drives me towards it, and my understanding of what drives all of us towards it.
Yeah. Cody,
how do I follow
knowing
that up?
Well, I was gonna say, like, this is a thing that Kyle and I had been doing. No, but I feel like that it's important to call that out, because this is a thing that Kyle and I had been doing recently.
Yeah.
But Kyle and Cody, you guys had a gaming website, a gaming podcast years before the Shea Hates Everything podcast started. So, and obviously you guys are best friends. You talk about games all the time, play games together all the time. And so it was a super natural fit for our thing, all three of us' thing, but also, like, you've got a background in doing this too, Cody. So what, like, you know, I reached out and just said, hey, we've been talking about adding a third person. If you don't want to do it, we aren't going to add a third person.
Yeah, that was kind of the deal.
why get back into this? Where's the passion? What is the passion in creating a new thing to talk about games?
Sure. And, you mentioned that we used to have a website, YouTube channel and stuff, which we'll talk about more a little bit later. But, it's funny. I listen to your guys' podcasts on a regular basis. I don't listen to podcasts. Like, I don't. And because, I enjoy hearing your guys' discussion, that was the podcast that I listened to. So on one hand, I am a little bummed because I don't have content that I can listen to now. that I'm
now
not
you get to listen
of.
to yourself, man.
I'm right.
That's where the narcissism comes
so
in,
much
baby.
worse.
Join the narcissistic parade.
I'll be listening to our podcast when I'm like doing the dishes or making my kids lunch for the next day, and my wife will come downstairs and I have to pause it because I'm like, I don't want you hearing me listen to myself on a podcast.
Too many layers of it's like you don't want anyone else coming into the room when you're looking at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's a lot like that.
So anyway, yeah, I was a big listener. I would usually listen when I was in the car doing something, and I would often find myself having vocal discourse with two people who couldn't hear me.
It was just about how right we were, right?
Oh, always, every time.
Yeah. Your emails definitely bear that out.
So I mean, like, I thoroughly enjoy talking critically about games. I enjoy having a different opinion, and I honestly, I think that's one of the reasons why, not to toot my own horn here, but what I can bring to Party Select is, in a lot of ways, a potential, a true third voice. I don't want this to be an echo chamber, and I don't think, Kyle and Shea didn't look for someone who would just agree with everything that they had, because then that would be, that's what it would become. So yeah, I'm excited to be a dissenting view when it's honest, and I'm excited to agree, with the two of you when, when it's honest. So, I look forward to bringing what I have. And so when you asked, I jumped on the opportunity.
I think, the last point around a different viewpoint or different type of voice, I think is really important too. Cause I know, Kyle, for you and I, we certainly do not agree always on games. I don't know that we disagree more than we agree, but we disagree a lot. But I think it's more about the application or maybe like the execution, because I do think that we look at games in a pretty similar way. I think holistically, you and I are both maybe pessimistic by default, maybe overly critical by default.
Perhaps.
And so I think someone with Cody's perspective is very valuable, because we were always going to disagree about if a game is good or bad and why we think it's good or bad. But like how you think about games and how you approach gaming as a hobby and as a passion, I think people have a huge variety of ways that they do that. And Kyle and I, because we're brothers, we're very similar in a lot of ways. We tended to look at things in a very similar way. And I think that's where a lot of the fun conversations in like Discord would always happen with Cody, is because Cody a lot of times would be like, hey, let's see you guys talk about this on the podcast. Nah, man. Like I thought about this, or I'm looking at it this way.
Right.
And Kyle and I, of course, are like, no, you're dumb.
Yeah, you're stupid. Shut up.
Oh,
and then Cody's like, no, you guys are dumb. And then we just call each other dumb. So that's what y'all have to look forward to on this podcast.
There was one episode when
calling each other dumb.
When you were talking about the Dragon Quest III recent HD remake, and you were both so confused why they released 3. And you're like, what are they doing? And then they're going back and releasing, and I'm like screaming, like, it's a prequel. Like, it drove me nuts.
Yeah.
So I can bring a lantern through the fog of misinformation to this podcast.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Love that. Always fun to remember the few times where we were wrong, rather than the number of times like you learned something you didn't know while listening to the podcast. See, so Cody's just as negative as we are. It all fits in together.
All right, we need to cancel this thing. If there's no one positive here, what are we doing?
Yeah. I do think like it's cool to talk about, and I feel like the biggest thing or the biggest way that new listeners or viewers will kind of get to know us is just by watching and listening, and over time you'll kind of figure out where we come from. We do want to walk through in a bit some of like our gaming backstory and a lot of the games that we do like for people that don't know us at all, just to see like, hey, is there someone that I tend to align with more? I think it's really important when you're engaging with content, especially in games, really with anything, that it doesn't become an echo chamber, to Cody's point,
right?
Where you aren't only seeking out views and opinions that kind of match your own, or, you know, affirm things that you assumed, right? That you're getting differing viewpoints from people that you can respect and trust, that their opinions and their thoughts are like coming from a good place. And that's something I feel very confident about with the three of us. Like, hey, guess what? None of us are going to complain about games being woke. I promise you that.
Right.
So here's your safe zone from a lot of the toxicity that tends to happen in games these days. That ain't how we think about it. We approach things with, I don't know, a brain, I guess you could say.
Got him.
I think, you know, taking it down a level, talked about like how we approach games, some of our backstory individually and together. What can people expect from this actual podcast? So as I mentioned, this is sort of a special episode, not a normal format, but I think like we'll talk at the end about literally pieces of content that are going to be coming over the next several weeks. But I think in terms of the Party Select main podcast, if we want to call it the flagship podcast, that's going to be monthly, the first Monday of every month, we're just going to catch up on games we've been playing. A lot of times there's going to be a lot of crossover. For example, going into episode 1, all three of us are pretty deep into Avowed.
Yeah.
We all have very different opinions about Avowed. So that'll be a fun conversation for episode 1. We're also going to bring, you know, relevant news stories. Certainly not everything. You know, if we're doing it once a month, a lot of stuff kind of gets stale, but big news stories, or even just like big conversation topics. Like, let's talk about layoff implications for all these different, you know, people that are being impacted. What can we expect over the next several years? Let's talk about Sony's approach to marketing their games in this era where Xbox is kind of backing away from a lot of the console race. So like bigger picture conversational things. We're going to do a lot of that. You can also send us your emails. partyselectpod@gmail.com is the email address. You can send those there. We'll read them. Doesn't even have to be video game related. We'll take whatever you want to send, and we'll talk about it. Listeners of the Shea Hates Everything podcast will affirm that is true. We will read anything that you send in.
It's true.
But yeah, and it's just, we're going to do a bunch of other types of content that we'll talk about later. But for the main podcast, just talking about video games, man. We're just hanging out. We want you to feel like you were hanging out with us, that we're all sitting at a bar, at someone's house, or on the couch playing games and just hanging out and chatting together. So that's kind of the approach to how we're going to do the podcast.
Yeah. General vibes.
Yeah. So, why should anyone care about what we have to say? You shouldn't. That's like the main.
Yeah.
You don't need to care. You know what? You're right, Cody. There's the positivity coming in. You should care because we have good opinions and we're fun.
That's right. I care.
But
so.
You cared. That's right. You cared enough to join us along this thing. But I think it would be fun to sort of take a trip down memory lane and not prove to you all that we are gamers, but maybe talk about our backstory with games. How do we get into games? What are some of the things that we've done with video games that we feel really good about or really passionate about? And then we could talk a little bit about our background with games media, games criticism. You know, we mentioned Shea Hates Everything. We mentioned the podcast you guys did. So a little bit of that backstory just to, you know, this isn't our first go around talking about games and thinking critically about games. So when you think back to early gaming memories, Cody, maybe for you, what are some of your earliest gaming memories? What got you into video games?
Yeah, we had planned this question ahead of time, and I spent a lot of time thinking, and I feel like for one, at the top, I have a god awful memory, just straight up. My long-term memory is horrible. So that also led to my struggle in coming up with answers for this. But I do have two very core memories about gaming that I believe are the earliest that I can actually, you know, truthfully remember.
Yeah.
I remember being at my older brother's birthday party at it was at a pizza place, and him opening the Ocarina of Time Nintendo 64 game.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was the coolest freaking thing. The box is all gold and everything.
Oh yeah,
man, I thought that was the coolest freaking thing. I don't remember actually watching him play it, but I definitely remember watching him opening it.
Nice.
And the other one I had also involves my brother. He is, I believe, because of his interest in video games, that sort of trickled down to me. I remember him waking me up one night, because I was very young, so I had gone to bed earlier than him. He woke me up and showed me that he bought an original Xbox and Halo 1 from a friend and was all excited about it. And that I definitely remember watching him play. And, those are like the two core early gaming memories that I have. So
not
I wish
even
they were more
playing
interesting
games.
or more about
Just
me actually playing. But
yeah, that's interesting.
they're definitely both involving my brother.
That's awesome.
Kyle, what about you? I feel like there's going to be some similarities with you and I, but curious for you, like what jumps out as some of the early stuff for you.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think you and I would have ever gotten game consoles had we not been to a friend's house that had them and played them and then asked mom and dad for them, because like mom and dad were not going to go out of their way to pick up consoles for us. It was if we showed an interest in something, they would help us engage with it, but they were never trying to like force feed stuff to us or and certainly not something
especially
like
not with video games.
Not with dad in video games. So I definitely think I have some very, very vague memories of, so when we lived in Illinois, we moved from Illinois to Wisconsin when I was like 5 or 6. So this was 5 or younger, but I definitely remember going over to someone's house, probably one of your friends in Illinois, and watching them play Super Mario Bros. 2.
Okay.
Hold on. Which one? Oh, God. Which Super Mario Bros. Is the one with Yoshi for the first time? And like the colors.
Super Mario
World. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So it was Super Mario World. And I remember because like the colors just like exploded my brain.
Oh, yeah.
When I was little. That's like the furthest back thing I can remember video game wise that stuck with me. And that I was probably either 4 or 5. But first memory I have of playing something is and so this breaks my heart. Like, I despise Mario Party with a flaming fervent passion. One of my earliest video game memories is living in Wisconsin. Shortly after we moved there were people who lived down the hill from us, and they had an N64. And I went over there and we would play Mario Party all the fucking time. And so that's one of the earliest memories I have. I also have some memories of our other neighbor that was next to us with a dad who did some not great stuff. The other neighbor who was next to us, they had a PC and they had a lot of like old edutainment games. And I think they had like Mario Teaches Typing. They definitely had like Carmen Sandiego and like those old Nancy Drew games. I think, they probably had Math Blasters because they did homeschooling.
Right.
And so I super remember going over there and playing some of those like edutainment games, those old detective games like Nancy Drew and Carmen Sandiego. So that was like really early video game. It was like head exploded with colors from Super Mario World. Social gaming experience with Mario Party on the N64, and then like all these like really brain bending detective games and edutainment games that were like making math fun. I maintain Math Blasters is why I like math to this day. But yeah, sorry, I'm losing my voice. I've had the flu for the past week. So that's my stuff with games. So Shea, I'll let you take over now so I can rest my voice a bit.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my earliest memory of playing a game, and my memory is also, Cody, terrible, so I'm there with you. My earliest memory playing a game was actually our Sega Genesis playing Vector Man. That's like the earliest memory I have. It's a very specific level in Vector Man where like you're in the sky, like jumping.
That's the first level, yeah. And then you fight the big trash monster.
Sure, yeah.
I still
and I
have
also
that cart. I played that cart in our Genesis like a month and a half ago.
I also very specifically remember because we had an original Game Boy that we got for Dad. It was really for us, but we got it for Dad for him to play Mario Golf. And I remember playing Mario Golf on the Game Boy.
Correction.
And we also ended up getting a Sega Game Gear.
Correction.
What?
It's just titled Golf.
Yes, okay, but it's Mario Golf. That's what this is going to be like.
Look, I'm just saying I'm the real gamer here.
I thought you were
Yeah,
sick
okay.
and losing your voice. Go back to losing your voice.
And we also had a Sega Game Gear. I don't know why we got a Sega Game Gear, but we did. And I remember playing the Formula One racing game on Game Gear. I do not remember playing anything else ever on Game Gear, but I do remember playing Formula One racing. I did not know at the time, because we were given somewhat of an option between a Nintendo and a Genesis, and we chose a Genesis. I don't know why at the time, but I think there might have been an element of everyone's got a Nintendo. I want the different thing. Even at a young age, I was a douchebag. I can't speak for Kyle and his thought process on that, but that was a thing growing up. We had the Genesis, and we never had a Nintendo console until the GameCube. And there was some of that like stubborn, I want to be different energy that it took until we got a GameCube for me to be like, we fucked up.
Yeah.
Like, this was the wrong call. And we had a PlayStation 1 also, like we were big PlayStation kids.
Right.
But I played, like every friend had an SNES. Every friend had an N64. I played all of those games and loved all of those games, but we never owned any of them until Kyle recently, you went and bought all those consoles. But like that's a huge part of my childhood that I regret. And it was because I wanted to be different and get the Sega console. What an idiot. So that's one of my early memories for sure.
Kid chameleon.
Choosing
though,
the
dude.
wrong side.
Kid chameleon.
Yeah. Look, man, I'm not saying there aren't good games on Sega Genesis. I am saying that no game on Sega Genesis is as good as half of the games on SNES and N64.
I
I'll
think
be
that's
honest.
fair.
I didn't even know the Game Gear was a thing until I met Kyle. I
Really?
literally had never heard of it.
Shame on you.
Like, I straight up, I don't even know if we owned other games on Game Gear. Do you remember playing anything else, Kyle?
No, I think Dad literally bought it so he could play Formula One
Yeah.
on his plane rides, his business plane rides.
Yeah. And it was a fun game,
Yeah.
but it wasn't worth buying another handheld console.
That
I mean, the Game
that ran
Boys.
on like approximately 12 AA batteries.
Oof.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that thing was a beast. It was heavy also.
Yeah, because of the 12 AA batteries.
True.
If you hold it without batteries in it, it's kind of light. It's like as light as a Switch. And then you add in like 5 pounds of batteries. Dad has a Game Gear. We got him one for Christmas one year because we didn't know what to get him for Christmas. We're like, hey, remember you liked this thing? Here's this Game Gear. He still has it, and he verified for me that it works.
That it's still,
Yeah, I was like
He had to
secretly
put a bunch of new batteries in it.
I was secretly trying to figure out, like, A, does he still play it? And can we buy him more games for it as a Christmas present?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is no. But then B, if he has it, does it still work? And how can I get it in his head that he should give it to me?
What a thoughtful gift for you to get our father. A gift that you want him to give you back at some point.
Yep.
'Tis this season. The reason for the season.
Oh, man.
So yeah, I think always fun to go down memory lane. Also kind of highlights we're all kind of old. Or sort of getting there. We're getting there in terms of being old.
Yeah.
Because I know I don't talk to a lot of people that are younger than me, but I see a lot of people talking about video games, talking about the PlayStation 2 being their intro
First,
into video games. And I'm just like, man, I'm old as hell. But because
gamers.
we're getting old, we've played a lot of video games.
Oh,
so we're going to talk a bit about some favorites and kind of genres that we go to typically. But when you think about your long storied history with video games, what are some of the coolest things, the things you're most proud of in video games? I'll start to kick it off. I got all 242 stars in Super Mario Galaxy. That's my crowning achievement.
That's big.
In video games. It was extremely hard. For those that don't know, it's getting all 141 stars, or sorry, it's like 121 stars as Mario, and then you have to play the entire game again as Luigi, and Luigi controls differently. So it's not just a model swap.
Yeah.
He has like a longer jump. He slides when he runs. He is much more difficult to control. And that game, the like secret hidden levels, the purple star levels,
those are
pretty fucking brutal.
Those are rough.
I ended up like I had 20 stars left. I didn't want to, but I was like, you know what? This is one of my favorite games I've ever played. I'm going to do this.
Yeah, you're almost there.
Yeah, might as well. I did not do that for Super Mario Galaxy 2, which is pretty telling. That was a one-time thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's probably like the thing I'm most proud of doing. I remember telling my friend Adam the day after I got all those, and he was like, dude, hell yeah. And getting some respect from a fellow gamer feels good.
That does feel good.
What about you guys?
Cody, you go first.
No, Cody, you first.
Okay.
So basically what I'm learning from this is I need to specifically say, you talk now. Because otherwise this is what's going to happen.
No,
This is the difficulty with three people.
Shay,
why don't you go a second time?
Cody, you go.
Let's see. I have put on a couple. I think my biggest one though is, and I will, credit where credit's due. Kyle assisted me in this, but beating The Last of Us on grounded difficulty. That shit is so fucking hard.
Yeah,
that is so hard. Specifically the segment when you're with David as Ellie, having to fend off all the clickers and everything coming into that shack. Holy cow. That is so hard. But we
kind of have to cheese that.
Yes.
Yes.
Because you can
100%.
position yourself behind David to make him like take hits and like intercept. Yeah.
So while like he's like grappling with them, you run up behind him and stab them. And
right. To save ammo.
The cheap. Yep.
Yep.
So there's that one. That's probably the biggest one. Some other like honorable mentions, similar to your Galaxy. I got all the moons and Odyssey. Just
wow.
The absolute.
How many?
900.
Is it like 900 some?
I think 999 maybe. I don't remember.
That's I got like 700 some, and I was like, that's
to be fair,
enough.
you get like I don't know, maybe like 200 from just like playing the game, just like sort of casually. So, but like there's like the dark side of the moon levels, which you don't have the cap for, so that's just like pure platforming. The payoff, spoilers for the like an 8-year-old game. So one of the worlds you go to in Odyssey is the Mushroom Kingdom, so it has Peach's castle and everything. Mm-hmm. The castle just gets a golden top hat on it, and that's
hell yeah.
I don't know why I would expect like a trophy or something. Why would I expect more? But I was very disappointed for all the work that I put into it.
It's not about the destination; it's about the journey.
Clearly,
achievement is its own reward. Cody.
That's right.
That's the Nintendo slogan.
Let's see. Before Elden Ring came out, I played all the Soulsborne games aside from Sekiro, all on my own. I had beaten them. This was a while ago. I was really proud of that because I had never played any of them, and then I think I was a bet to beat them all, like the ones that were out within that summer that it was. So I did that. Pretty proud of that. And then lastly, just recently, I played through every single Batman video game, and there's some stinkers.
How many is that?
With one exception.
Oh gosh. Yes, one exception that I quite literally could not. It was actually a Genesis game. And I quite literally could not figure out the controls for. It was not because it didn't work or anything. I got the game running. I just fundamentally could not figure out the controls. And you know what? Kyle owns it now, so next time I'm there, if we can figure it out, I'll play it. I'll
Batman
own up to
Forever on the Genesis.
That's right. Yeah, I'll do it.
That is actually, I have always owned that one. That's one that Shea, you and I owned forever ago.
It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. It looks
horrendous.
Very bad. Yeah,
it's horrendous.
But all in all, it was I don't know, maybe 20 games around there. And they. Thankfully they got better in the latter half. But those early ones are pretty bad. So
anything movie tie-in is usually going to be pretty rotten.
Yeah.
In the 90s, 2000s era.
Pretty rough stuff.
What about you, Kyle? Prove your gaming cred to us.
All right. The thing I'm the most proud of is beating up through the village fight Resident Evil 4 blindfolded. Being guided by my partner Kara. Unfortunately, like we did it on their like Twitch profile or whatever, and they didn't have VODs turned on. Or like they didn't have like the VOD saving thing, so it went away. So there's no proof of it
there's
anymore.
No proof
other than the memories of the people who were there, including my own.
Was this on professional difficulty?
Yes, yeah, on probably.
Yeah, I don't.
And just
never
for
played
context,
non-professional.
Yeah, for context, this is your favorite game of all time.
Yes, I know it backwards and frontwards, and apparently also
you've played
blindfolded.
it. How many times do you think you've beaten RE4?
Beaten?
Yeah.
I mean,
or like played, because you've played it on every console.
I have played it on every
also.
console it's been released on, except for the Switch,
which is a lot.
Except for the Switch. I didn't realize it had come out on the Switch physically.
And the mobile phone.
Well, that's the new RE4s on mobile.
Oh, okay.
And fuck that game. That's a piece of shit. The original RE4 is a good one. That's hey, listeners, viewers, that's my hot take. That nobody else agrees with. That's fine. Yeah, but that was an incredible experience. So not only is it like a trust fall exercise with your partner because they're telling you where people are coming from and all that other stuff, I was like correcting them because Kara would be like, oh yeah, no, there's a thing in the way. I'm like, no, that should be like to the left, like by a couple feet or whatever. Or they'll be like, yo, there's a barrel around the corner or something. Like, nah, it's actually like around the next thing. And yeah, I like that game a lot. It's a good video game. They have not made one better since. Anything else? I platinumed the first Dead Space. That was a big moment for me because I don't care about platinuming or trophies or achievements. I just loved it so much. And like, surprise, surprise, it's basically Resident Evil 4 in space.
Yep.
But yeah, the first Dead Space, beating that with like just the plasma cutter, because that was a trophy for just the plasma cutter. That was a fun run through. Surprisingly easy to do.
I remember when you got that platinum, and I was like, "Ooh, I should do that too," because I love that game. And then I saw just like two of the trophies, because it was one of them was being the whole thing with just the plasma cutter, and I was like, I just don't want to do that. Like, I'm not gonna do that. I don't have enough patience to replay the entirety of a game for an arbitrary reason like that. So yeah, you got my respect for
I did the
Thank
platinum of the remake, the recent remake. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, okay. So
I think it's the same
talk
trophies.
Talk about doing a remake the right way. The Dead Space remake is incredible.
Yeah, it is.
It's good.
Anyways,
I got two other that aren't so much like I'm super proud of it, but because they're associated with some of my favorite games, I'm just happy that I have done them. And that is getting the platinum trophy in Skyrim twice. So I got it on PS3, which that's more just sinking hours into that game. It's not a difficult game, but getting like all of the Daedric artifacts and a lot of the different quests. And I think there are a couple like you have to replay from certain save points to make different choices. I think that's the case. But then I got it again when it re-released on PS4 with the special edition. And so just sinking 100 hours into that game all over again to get the platinum was fun. And like, I'm glad that I did it. And then beating all three Mass Effect games on Insanity. The first game is very tough on Insanity because the combat is not that good.
Yeah.
The second game is also very tough because the combat, while good, is very stiff. The third game is like kind of a breeze, honestly, on Insanity, just because you have so much mobility and the powers are so crazy. But yeah, that was a fun one. I did that on the whatever legendary edition when they packaged all three games on PS4.
Yeah,
I went ahead and did all those, and that was a really good time.
Nice.
Oh, and I gotta mention, we talked about this just a couple months ago. Kyle was talking about replaying the Killzone games.
Oh, yeah.
And I have the trophy for hitting the top 5%
Yes.
in score and Killzone 2 multiplayer. I wasn't particularly amazing at Killzone multiplayer. I was good at it, but it was because I played so fucking much over a summer.
Yeah.
I was playing hours of that game almost every day because I didn't have anything else to do and I was staying up all night and I was in college. What are you going to do? So yeah, I popped the top 5% trophy.
Hell yeah.
I remember when it happened, I was like, I should stop playing Killzone 2 for a bit. I've been playing too much of this.
You've peaked.
So yeah.
Yeah.
There's some proud gaming moments. Some of them impressive, some probably not, but we don't really give a shit.
Nah.
We ain't got nothing to prove to you.
Dude, Resident Evil 4 blindfolded. You can't laugh at that.
That's fun.
That's good
That's
shit.
fun.
I
It'd be better if you
desperately
beat
wanna
the
do
whole
it
game.
again. I want to do it again and beat the whole game.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that. I think also fun to talk about. We mentioned this a little bit, but as we got older, we started thinking about games in a more mature way. And I feel like we all ended up with a passion for video game related content creation as well as games criticism. So like I started a website back in 2013, Shea Hates Everything, just because I wanted to write reviews and write lists and I just wanted that creative outlet. But I had also had a YouTube channel inspired, frankly, by Kyle in starting a YouTube channel where I did lots of Let's Plays and rankings and that kind of thing. So I've always been passionate about writing and reviews. I'm very OCD, so putting things in a structure and in an order makes me really happy. Assigning things a score makes me really happy. And so I just was always really interested in that. And started the podcast, as Kyle said, as a way for us to like hang out and talk about games. But that passion has not gone away. And like the more that I've done it, the more I've discovered that while I love writing, I much prefer just to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, and so if I was going to go do it again, I would have probably not done the blog and I would have just dedicated more time to the YouTube channel and done more like actual long form video review content. Because that's something that I would still love to do. In some capacity. So filling some of that void with this podcast. What about you guys? Oh, sorry, I can't open it up like that. Kyle, why games media? Why games criticism? What have you done in this before?
Well, yeah, like you mentioned, I had a YouTube channel that, you know, you and I even did like a couple series together. Like we played Dead Space 3 co-op bro-op. We did Lord of the Rings War in the North co-op where our save got corrupted. That was a bummer. Cube.
I remember that. That was before I had a YouTube channel. That was just I was visiting. I was visiting mom and was staying at mom's for like a week or whatever it was, and we sat next to each other and just talked while you played
long time viewer of the Drum
Good
Kid.
Lord, man.
OG fan.
Yeah. But yeah, I made like over 700 YouTube videos of a bunch of different series and stuff. A lot of really dumb stuff. And then Cody, you and I started Casuals Gaming News and Review while we were in college instead of going to class, which is why I ended up on academic probation.
And why Casuals no longer exists.
We had a whole website where we were trying to do it all, right? We were trying to do a video podcast once a week. We were doing Let's Play content. We were doing review content. We were posting new trailers. You know, we were on the
writing articles.
We were on the PR distro list for a lot of companies and trying to get that material out there through article or video form. We were writing reviews. You know, it was the whole 9 yards. We were in it pretty much 24/7. It was extremely creatively fulfilling, but it was the bane of your and I's friendship because we were also living together at the time. It was the bane of your and I's ability to succeed in college, and really have other people in our lives. Like it came at the expense of a lot of things. So it eventually had to die on the vine, which is a good thing in the long run, but it taught us a lot about how we think about games. It taught us a lot about how to write and engage with the space. And we worked a lot of the kinks out through doing that. And that was a ton of fun. So,
yeah.
A lot of
I think
experience
equally
there.
as important in that experience was learning the things that you don't want to do.
Right.
So like when we talk about party
Totally.
select, right? Like
Yeah.
what are the things we want to engage in and do? You guys have a lot of history of like the grind of trying to enter games media.
Totally.
Which was never the thing that I tried to do or that Shea Hates Everything was ever trying to be. And so it's good for us to have that conversation. One, because you guys have exposure to that and experience with that. But two, you didn't like doing that stuff.
Right.
And so you don't want to do it again. And so that makes it very easy when we are collaborating and figuring out like, what do we want to do with Party Select? What other ideas? Do we want to do X and Y and Z? And you guys are like, nah, we did that.
Yeah, we don't want to fall.
It
We don't want
doesn't-
to fall in the same trap we fell into. Of
Yeah.
you know, we really thought we could do it all right at the beginning from the get go.
Yeah.
We just, you know, let's do a website, but on top of the website, let's have a YouTube channel. Let's also live stream. Let's also write articles. Let's have a schedule for articles. So all those are very exciting and things that maybe had we, you know, spread them out a bit more, that we would have found more success. But you know, that was sort of a big lesson from Casuals that we were able to adapt here of like, you know, again, here we have a bunch of great ideas, but like, you know, let's make sure this lasts and let's make sure we got a good groundwork before we start adding on to it.
Yeah, like it's okay to
we're-
just pick the best of the best ideas and keep
Right.
the other ideas that you like for later, or let them go.
And that we're doing this for fun,
Yeah.
right? Like we would love to build this to a point where we could monetize it. We would love to build this to a point where we feel like we have a community and an audience that cares, where we can, that allows us to commit more time and energy to it. But that's not how we're going to start this, right? Like we don't have a daily schedule. We're not even trying to do like half a dozen things in a month, because that's just, you know, even looking back, right? You guys were grinding it out. You were also in college.
Yeah.
Zero responsibilities. That's the time to do that and figure that out. We all have like lives and jobs and families.
Yep.
We ain't got time for that right now. Like
Nope.
we just have we would have to sacrifice everything else that we're passionate about, and that's not the point of this. The point of this is to hang out with your dudes and like talk about games and have a good time.
Yeah.
So that's what we're gonna do. What else, Cody? Like I feel like with you and Kyle doing Casuals, what was your perspective on that? Like where did you kind of find your wheelhouse? Did you guys do different types of things? Like what were you passionate about when you were doing more of the games media and criticism?
Sure. I loved the article writing. Because when I had gone into, when I had started college, I did start as a English major with a focus of professional writing and hopes to become a bona fide games journalist.
Nice.
You know, I wanted to write those articles, and you know, I was a big fan of Game Informer back then, and you know, would always read what they had. So I will say, you know, one of my goals going into that was, as Kyle mentioned, to get on those PR lists and get a review copy of a game. Gratefully, you know, in the, you know, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 years in which we ran Casuals, we got a few review copies, which that is one of the crowning achievements of any creative endeavor that I've gone through.
Getting something for free.
Yeah.
Yeah, and being able to play it, write my review, follow an embargo, and you know, like that was one of the coolest experiences you know, I've had outside of playing a game that relates to games. So, you know, I really like that aspect. I've always had an idea of having, you know, since Casuals, of starting a blog and writing my thoughts and opinions. You know, my outlet now has just turned into, you know, my conversations with the two of you on Discord. So, you know, that it all sort of circles back to now here at Party Select of, you know, being able to communicate and talk critically about something I'm really passionate about. So,
yeah, love it. Where do you guys go to learn about games? So we talk a lot about like what our backstory is, what we have done. I think something like there's no shortage of gaming related content, which is like a challenge for us. Like, how do we differentiate what's kind of our special niche? But where are you guys going, knowing that games media has changed, especially over the last couple of years? It's become far more democratized. A lot of like the big players have lost some of their legitimacy. Let's be real.
Yeah.
what are the types of things that you guys like? Is it like Cody? Is it the written form? Do you like reading reviews? Are you guys usually hanging out on YouTube? Are you in Discord communities, Reddit, etc.? Like, what are the things? Kyle, maybe you can start. Like, what are the things that you're engaging with right now?
Yeah, if it's news, I get it from a few different sources because I try to shop around a little bit to get a couple different perspectives. I watch Game Mess Morning with Jeff Grubb pretty much every day on Giant Bomb. He'll go over stories from various different sources, and so I've kind of pulled a couple from him just because I find him to have, a reasonable amount of journalistic integrity. Not that he's perfect, but I trust in the things that he says and the message that he tries to get across, and find that I often align with the intent behind his passion. If it's like a written article, I'm going to VGC primarily, Video Games Chronicle. I find that they editorialize some of the least, and I appreciate that just because, like, I don't need to be told what to think. I just need the information. And that's I find VGC to be a very good source for that. Like the IGNs, the Kotakus, the GameSpots, I find their writing style to be very pandering. And like I don't know, I guess I don't want to like say a bunch of bad stuff about these outlets because they're people that are working hard there, but they just have a different mission, right? Like they're not for me. They're not what I am looking for. They are trying to serve a need from a particular slice of the market. So I tend to gravitate towards VGC because they're pretty straightforward, fact-based. There's not a lot of editorializing there. Sometimes they like slide it in a little bit with like, here's a link to an article where we discuss this stuff, but they won't do it like directly in the writing, which I appreciate. So,
yeah, I think the IGN thing I think is a great example because I was a big IGN fan earlier on, right? Like high school, college age.
Right.
Because I liked a lot of the personalities that were there.
Right.
Greg Miller, Colin Moriarty, Damon Hatfield or whatever his name was. Back in like the 1UP days. Like there were a lot of like gaming websites that I really liked the personalities. And it was because those personalities were my age, a little bit older, and a lot of them moved on and then were replaced by new personalities who were all younger than me. And inherently they're targeting a different kind of audience because of that. And that's where I feel like there are exceptions, right? But the IGN is a great example of a website that I don't feel like their mission or their kind of content has evolved a ton over the years. It has just because all content has changed. But I think it's more about like the humans making the content are different. And that isn't inherently bad. It's just I am older now. And not that I can't listen to someone who's younger than me talk about video games, but it's a different kind of personality. It's a different generation of people. And I think that's a big part of it with me.
Yeah.
I also think like with there being such an easier way to get into talking about games, there's way more variety and it's much easier. I mentioned this at the beginning. It's very easy to find an echo chamber of just like individual content creators that you agree with everything they say. And if they say one thing that you disagree with, I'm out. I'm going to unsubscribe, whatever. I disagree with you one time. And that's why I think it's so important to find people that you align with their approach to games. Just like y'all listening to this, you're going to disagree with many of the things that we say. But do you align with the way that we think about games, the way that we approach games, and like, is our heart in the right place for you? So most of the stuff that I engage with is on the YouTube side. I like VGC. I do like reading a lot of written reviews, even from places that like I don't care so much about, but I regularly surf OpenCritic and just like read reviews just for fun, even from places like IGN because I'm curious. But for me, it's a lot of the YouTube stuff. Skill Up is sort of my go-to person, both for review. He does super long form, 30-minute video reviews. He also does a weekly news show, which I like because it's pretty comprehensive. He editorializes a ton. But what I like is I get the information and I get his opinion on the information. And that allows me to go seek out more opinions about the information.
Right.
So I'm not just like listening and believing what he says. I'm getting his opinion because I respect his opinion and his approach, but he's talking about the stuff that I care about. I used to get a lot of my news on Twitter. I have not been on Twitter in a long time for obvious reasons. And so I'm kind of lacking some of that minute by minute updates and news.
Right.
Frankly, where I get a lot of my news now is from Cody via Discord.
Yeah.
Because Cody's sharing stuff from Twitter. Thankfully, articles, right? Like not tweets,
Right.
but sometimes tweets from, Warrior64, whoever it might be. But yeah, I think mostly for me, it's creators. I like ACG's reviews. I watch a lot of game ranks. They do before you buy, which is very subjective. Let me just show you some gameplay, talk about my experience. It's not like a review, but I like a lot of that type of content. The more casual stuff these days.
Yeah.
What about you, Cody?
Yeah, I mean, you sort of mentioned there. So, echoing sort of what you said, it's, pre-social media, I feel like there were pre-social media and everyone has a podcast and everyone can voice their opinion and whatever. There were a lot less options. So I feel like it was easier to sort of like, I honed in on Game Informer a lot for, all their content, both written and video. Now there's so much and everyone gets things at a different time. I've found myself, I get almost all of my news, video game and otherwise, via any number of social media. Be it X, Twitter, and Blue Sky or Reddit, and often I get that news well before I see it even posted anywhere. Right. that really is that sort of minute to minute, which is good and bad. If it's bad news, and if it's a lot of bad news, frankly, it's not great. But that's just where I'm finding, because there's so many options out there. To find that article, I would have to already be reading that publication, whatever it might be, just to see a headline on Reddit and I know that news and then I can go into it.
Yeah.
That sort of aggregation of news is sort of where I find myself now versus having any one true source to go to. So,
yeah, I like that. I like that approach. And like I said, it's helpful for me because I don't need to be on Twitter for my news because you just show the highlights.
I got you.
So you suffer for my benefit.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about us, the podcast, our backstory, kind of what led us to this point. We should actually talk about some video games.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did in prep for this is like thinking about how can we make plain to listeners, viewers, what games we like.
Yeah.
Should we just talk about our favorite games ever made? Should we talk about, our consoles? We talked about kind of what got us into games, some of our achievements. But I think a really good place, because recency bias is a thing, and there are a lot of people that have not been playing games for 20 plus years the way that we have, is to look at the last 5 years, 2020 through 2024, and just list our GOTYs, our favorite 5 games that came out each of those years, or our favorite game from each of those years. Because I think, we were joking about this, there might be a couple repeats, but I think largely we're all going to have a different favorite game from each year, which is a really fun exercise and kind of highlights we think about games pretty differently, and it's going to lead to some good conversations. So going back to 2020, go in your time machine. It feels both like forever ago and also not that long ago. Favorite game from 2020?
We're in the pandemic. Everyone get in the mindset.
No,
Yeah.
don't
You're
get in the
on lockdown.
mindset. Stay out of the mindset.
Cody, what was your
I'll go
your
first.
GOTY?
I believe at least one other person will have this one, but The Last of Us Part 2 was my game of the year in 2020.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
By a wide margin.
Yeah. Yeah. Cody wasn't on the podcast back then.
Would you like to hear what mine is?
I would.
Okay. Let's see, what did I write? Okay, it says by a very wide margin, The Last of Us Part 2.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's the same as Cody's.
Oh, wow. How about
It
that?
is.
Two of the three of us.
Wow.
It's funny in my thought process going into this. was exactly what I said. We're going to have a lot of very different answers. And I think one of the reasons I thought that was because I didn't even think about The Last of Us Part 2 as being a game that anyone would like enough to say it's their favorite game of the year. But I should have, because I do remember talking to Kyle once or twice about The Last of Us Part 2 and our differing opinions on that game. Kyle's put his microphone away. He is not willing to engage with me on this, which is very fair. Now, whenever The Last of Us Part 2 gets brought up, it's always couched in, don't worry, dude, we're not going to talk about it again. We're not going to get into this. My favorite game from 2020 is Ghost of Tsushima. 2020, in my opinion, even not liking The Last of Us Part 2, I believe 2020 is one of the best years in video game history. For me personally, in terms of like what games I enjoy. And Ghost of Tsushima, Ghost of Tsushima is very high on my list of favorite games ever made. That's another game that I platinumed twice when it came out, and then when they released the director's cut with the new DLC on PS5, I got all of the trophies a second time.
I'll say
That
this:
game is incredible.
I've never played that, so there is a chance that could be my game of the year of 2020.
I kind of doubt it because
Probably
I do
not.
know how much you love The Last of Us.
Last of Us Part 2.
Part 2.
That's the one.
That's pretty good.
But maybe. I hope you play it, and I hope you like it, because liking video games is nice. It's nice to like a video game.
Which is why you should like The Last of Us Part 2.
I'm glad
we came around to that. Yeah.
That was kind of what I was getting at. It's nice to like it and not as nice to not like it. I wish that I liked it. I just don't, for a lot of reasons.
So what's the next year you're interested in hearing about?
2021.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Kyle, you go first this time.
All right.
Your favorite game from 2021.
All right. And to the surprise of no one, it is Resident Evil Village.
That's maybe surprising.
Is it? That's a very good
I'll
video
say
game. That's the most like Resident Evil 4 a Resident Evil has been since Resident Evil 4.
But isn't that the first person? Isn't it first person?
Yeah, but like the
different.
number of homages to 4 is insane.
I will say,
I guess
for what it's worth, I had a list of 7 games that I put on my list. It was number 7 on my list.
Okay.
So that is to say, I think it is a surprise.
Okay.
I don't say it's a surprise in that I assumed you didn't like it, but like you wouldn't say Resident Evil 5 is one of your favorites. You wouldn't say Resident Evil 6 is one of your favorites.
Not 6. I would say Resident Evil 5 is. Resident Evil 5 is one of the greatest co-op
Not-
games
not-
ever made.
Not broadly speaking. I know you like that game, but whatever year it came out, I wouldn't expect you to say it was your game of the year. But maybe it is. That's what I mean by surprise. Maybe. So RE7 Village.
Yeah.
Game of the year 2021. What about you, Cody?
I had Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart.
That is my number 2. That game is excellent.
It's very good.
Very good.
I'm a sucker for every Ratchet and Clank game. I should say modern ones. Having replayed the original Ratchet and Clank fairly recently on the PlayStation Now streaming, it has not aged great, but Rift Apart is very excellent. It would have been my number 1 game, but I cheated just a little bit because my number 1 is Hades, which technically came out in 2020 on PC, but it released in 2021 on PlayStation 4 and other consoles, and that's where I played it. I did not play it on PC when it came out, so that's kind of my default because Hades is fucking awesome. I kind of had to give it the number 1 spot in 2021. Had I played it on PC in 2020, that would make 2020 an even crazier year in terms of awesome releases. Moving on to 2022. Cody, you go first this time. Best game from 2022.
Yeah, so 2022, I also had 7 games, with the first of which being God of War Ragnarok.
I'll go next because that's my GOTY also.
Okay.
God of War Ragnarok slaps. My memory is that game was a runaway winner for me.
This
in 2022.
story is great.
Yeah.
They made me not hate Boy as much.
Right.
That
Because
story
you
is
did not
great.
enjoy the first one.
No, because boys suck. Hate Boy.
Okay. Hate boys.
Hey, boy.
Kyle doesn't like boys.
No.
Got bad news for you, bro. We're going to have a lot of boy time.
Oh,
with the three of us
shit.
here.
I'm backing out.
So if it's not God of War Ragnarok, what is it?
It's the far superior video game, Case of the Golden Idol.
Okay. I can see that totally.
Apples to
I've not
apples.
played that. But I know a lot of people really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I like Cody, you and I playing Obra Dinn together, like unlocked. It harkens back to what I was talking about, my foundational gaming experiences, playing those PC like detective games with friends. So like that kind of collaborative problem solving and like mystery solving that really like makes my brain spark. And Case of the Golden Idol does it in such like a fascinating new kind of way. I love it so much. And then like Rise of the Golden Idol this past year was incredible as well.
That was my number 2. So right there with you.
Okay, hell yeah.
Cult of the Lamb was my number 2.
Cult of the
I
Lamb,
fucking
very
love.
good.
Cult of the Lamb that game is excellent.
Yeah.
But the gap between Cult of the Lamb and God of War Ragnarok
Sure.
is about as large as what I imagine Last of Us Part 2 and whatever your number 2 game is. God of War Ragnarok. Whew, what a game. 2023. I'll start this time.
Okay.
Because I have to give an RIP alongside the best video game that came out in 2023 resulted in everyone that made that game getting laid off. Fucking crazy. Because Hi-Fi Rush is my favorite game from 2023. It is not the kind of game that I would normally care about. Rhythm-based stuff. I mean, I play drums, but I don't love a lot of rhythm-based games. It's a pretty straightforward action platformer in a lot of ways. But the vibe, the music, the like combat loop, and the sense of zen, the fun characters and writing, takes a lot of fun pot shots at corporate culture, which I'm a huge fan of. That game was like a total breath of fresh air. And not, I mentioned Ghost of Tsushima, God of War Ragnarok, like games that are the big AAA games. And Hi-Fi Rush really transcended a lot of those games and is awesome.
Nice. Was Krafton picked up a lot of those devs from Tango?
Yes, they did. And they acquired the rights. They said they're making a sequel. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see. Because is it Krafton a 10-cent joint?
I believe, I don't remember. It is also Crafton, by the way.
Craft.
Not
Craft
Crafton.
on.
Craft on, craft off. Yes, Tencent holds a stake in
10
Krafton.
Cool.
Okay.
But Krafton is a South Korean gaming.
They own
Company.
everyone, don't they? But Crafton is also like a big multi-conglomerate publisher, so
What about
they got
Craft
their hands in
On?
a lot of pies. Craft Off, I believe, works exclusively in layoffs.
That
Craft
makes
Off
sense.
is the company you bring in to fire people when you
Sure.
gotta fire people. Cody, what's your favorite game from 2023?
Man, 2023 was a big year for me. It had a lot of bangers. And it was like the top 5 were pretty close contention for me, but it was by far the game I put the most time into. I've beaten this multiple times. Baldur's Gate 3.
You've beaten it multiple times.
Oh, I played through it at least 3 times now, and
That's crazy.
I'm going to do another play. Then later in March, they're releasing another update, adding some subclasses, and I will fully do another playthrough.
Because that game is large.
Yeah, it's long. It is so good. It is so good.
What about you, Kyle?
Number one in my heart, the only game for me, Alan Wake 2. It's just me. It's just me and
2
Sam
years ago.
Lake hanging out on a porch chatting. It's such an amazing time. It's so fucking good.
I think if you added together all of the minutes that you spent talking about Alan Wake 2 and its subsequent DLC on the Shea It's Everything podcast, you could fill like 3 to 4 episodes of podcast just of Kyle talking about Alan Wake 2.
Yeah.
You can
And
beat
me
the game
trying-
before he's done talking.
Yeah,
Probably.
if you listened to Kyle talk about Alan Wake 2 while playing Alan Wake 2, you would beat Alan Wake 2 before you finished Kyle talking about Alan Wake 2.
And if you listen to me talking about it backwards, something
It's Alan Wake 3.
Yeah, that like it's a spiral, not a loop. So
Cringe. No, I think, and Cody, I think 2023 is such an interesting example because objectively, that is one of the best years in video games. Baldur's Gate 3, Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Alan Wake 2, like, oh, absolutely, objectively amazing games. I just didn't want to play any of them. I didn't like any of them, of what I did play. And that's why I'm grateful to Hi-Fi Rush. Because if it wasn't Hi-Fi Rush, I wouldn't have a game of the year. I would like Spider-Man 2 a lot. But like, It's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird
Yeah.
when you don't like stuff that everybody else
it
likes.
is odd.
Oof.
Yep, for sure.
Feels uncomfortable at times.
yeah.
2024, last year. Cody, your favorite game from last year.
This is interesting because you guys had this discussion sort of already.
We
on your
did,
podcast. It's Astrobot. Astrobot was by far the best
Hell
game
yeah.
I played last year, without a doubt.
That's what my brain would say. My brain would say Astrobot is the best game that came out last year, but my heart is too strong, and my heart when it beats, it just goes ba 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 ba, because Helldivers 2
Oh my god.
is the best game that came out in 2024. Kyle,
I believe that. It's like winner by default. 7 Days to Die. It hit 1.0 last year, so
1.0,
it has
yeah.
to be my video game. I have checking Steam currently. 2,168.2 hours in 7 Days to Die.
that's your Hades, where it kind of like you have to give it to it, even
Yes.
technically maybe not, but you just have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the joy of personal lists. We don't need to have like specific rules around early access versus launch versus what console. Who cares?
Yeah.
It's your
I
favorite
will
game
say
you
something
played.
interesting about those 5 games that I listed. Aside from 2023 with Baldur's Gate 2, though I will say my number 2 was Spider-Man 2.
Mm-hmm.
4 out of my 5 number 1s are Sony first party, which, I mean, that's saying something. So,
Interesting, because my Ghost of Tsushima, God of War Ragnarok, Helldivers 2,
yeah.
those are all Sony, but Hi-Fi Rush, not anymore, but when it
Well,
came out,
yeah.
Xbox owned IP.
Right.
That is interesting, though. I do feel like that is a thing that the three of us do have in common. Although I would say Kyle is maybe getting farther away from being like a Sony narrative guy. You like many of them, but
still some
there
of
are
my
also
favorite
many
games.
yes, but there are also many of them that you're not as into. God of War stuff, Ghost of Tsushima.
Oh
like
yeah. So I still think
Spider-Man.
I still think the storytelling in those games is great. I just don't like the gameplay. Like
Sure,
like
but
the
that's
gameplay.
that's
of
part of it
Spider-Man.
being a video game.
Yeah. But like when you talk about Sony first party story video games, like single player story games, I still think their stories are some of the best stories in the business. I've just diverged from their gameplay design from some of those studios.
Yeah, I think because that is Sony's bread and butter, which we're seeing them backtrack from a lot of the live service bullshit.
Right.
But that's their bread and butter, is like the single player, let's call them like narrative single player games.
Right.
Where
Yeah,
obviously they have a lot of action and combat and mechanics in them, but inherently, because they're single player, like they're not puzzle games. They're not XYZ fighting games, like whatever it might be. They're very story focused, but they all feel like, well, a lot of them have somewhat similar gameplay design to them also, because they're like third person action games. Spider-Man, Last of Us, God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, like they're all third person action-y games. Some might have RPG mechanics, some of them are open world, but they're all pretty similar.
Yeah.
Like big picture.
I will say, like,
conversation.
now that you bring it up, it really just used to be Naughty Dog. they were pumping out Uncharted after Uncharted and then Last of Us. And that's like my heyday of Sony first party narrative focused video games. That was working for them, so I feel like they were getting their other studios to do those more, and those interpretations of that formula are the things that I don't connect that much with, like the God of War, it's Sucker Punch for Ghost of Tsushima,
and Infamous,
and Infamous and stuff. Like it's not. I'm
not
as into those.
I was gonna disagree, but you do have a point. I don't think like Naughty Dog wasn't the only studio doing that. They were maybe the most successful at doing that because, like Sucker Punch, they were doing Infamous, which was also that kind of game. But like if you look at Guerrilla, they were doing first-person shooters with Killzone and Resistance,
right?
And then, or I guess Insomniac did Resistance with Killzone, and then transitioned to Horizon.
Yeah,
Insomniac was doing Resistance, Ratchet and Clank, which they still have Ratchet and Clank, but then they're also doing Spider-Man, which fits into that mold. I would say Ratchet and Clank is pretty different.
Yeah.
It is a single-player game. It is a third-person action game, but the tone of it is very, very different from a lot of the other ones we list. So yeah, I think you have a point where a lot of their studios are doing more of that. Like I would call it like premier single-player games.
Yeah.
In the same way that like certain directors have like premiere films, right? Like everything that Tarantino does feels like a premiere film, Scorsese. And it feels like Sony's doing a lot of that with their game studios also.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see them pivot to live service because they were so successful with that.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of valid criticism came around about the homogenization of those types of games. They all feel kind of the same. And so they kind of pivot. That ain't working. And so they're going to pivot.
Let's go back. Yep.
So that's a fun conversation, talking about top fives. I do think it is both helpful and also not comprehensive to talk about, because I think helpful because it shows the types of games that we enjoy, but it doesn't do a good job what we kind of all did, which is, oh, but my second favorite game was this, or like my other games might be this. And so when you think about, for each of you, your favorite 5 games from those years and what maybe it says about the kinds of games you like, we just talk about Sony single-player games. I think all of us like those holistically. What are the other things? So, like, when I think about those for me, I certainly like the narrative-oriented stuff, but I'm a big sucker for, like, open-world style games. I don't want the bloat. Like, I'm over the Ubisoft approach to that stuff. But, like, the Ghost of Tsushima, Spider-Man, playing Avowed right now. I have a lot of criticisms of Avowed, but I like living and existing in a big world and just like running around and exploring that. I do really like that part of it. So open world stuff. I'm a big sucker for RPGs. I think in my advanced age, I lean a little bit more towards the ARPG because I want some good combat.
Sure.
But I do, my backstory would tell you that I love turn-based. I was a huge Final Fantasy fan, Xenosaga, like a lot of the old school JRPGs. The whatever Claire Obscure 33.
Oh,
that
yeah.
looks sick, which is a more traditional turn-based. So yeah, like the open worldy stuff, ARPGs, RPGs, things that are like really immersive sim, or like a Baldur's Gate 3 is a good example, where if it gets too deep, I kind of back off. Like I'm not a Dishonored person. I'm not a Baldur's Gate 3 person. I'm not a big CRPG person. It's just too much going on. I want to be able to turn my brain off if I choose to.
Sure.
So yeah, what else do you guys like that maybe isn't referenced in your favorite games from the last few years?
So I mean, like survival games are my genre. All brands and stripes. Survival horror, especially, but like survival crafting, open world survival crafting games, huge for me. Automation games, like factory games, like Factorio, Satisfactory. Those are huge. I like designing factories and efficient construction of things, and then watching, you know, the clockwork systems go. I think that's super satisfying. I like being able to make spreadsheets for video games. That's so fucking fun. Oh, dude, have you ever made a spreadsheet for a game? Oh, talk about
I don't think
part of the game.
That's the second screen experience I'm talking about. All right, none of this iPad bullshit. I'm pulling up Google Sheets. Yeah, it just those are kind of the big ones. Horror games in general, but especially survival horror. I love a Bethesda RPG. The open worlds fantasy RPGs are big.
That's a good rubric for my kind of RPG.
Yeah.
Where like you can make it deep in choice and mechanics, but you can also approach it kind of frivolously. I like that balance.
And I do occasionally dabble into the deeper simulation games because I find just that like the depth of understanding and the depth of the systems and the intricacy in which they are designed and crafted to be interesting. It's like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, I think, is a good thing to hold up against something like a Skyrim, or I guess an Avowed. Like those would be very current, right? So we have Avowed, classic Bethesda style open world, smear quotes, RPG, and then you have Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which is all about the depth of systems and the way in which they interact. It also happens to have a fantastic story.
Sure,
but I really like playing around. Like when you make a potion, there's this entire game they have designed around the making of a potion. Same with like sharpening your weapons weapons on a whetstone. You're like moving it back and forth, getting the angle right based on the sparks, and then pumping the wheel with your foot. Like it's crazy.
Like a not VR game for each one of those things that you do.
Yeah,
like it's
that's
so
very
in depth.
Good. Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. So I really, really enjoy games like that. I've liked like Farming Simulator, other stuff like that. This various simulator games I find to be very fun to kind of like switch your brain into that mode and dive deep. Anything else? I mean, I also, if we're talking about, I know this isn't a genre, but my favorite aesthetic of video games is probably that like PlayStation 1 era of textures wrapped around a polygonal 3D model, like the weird, I forget what it's called, but the weird way in which as the camera moves, the lines wave a little bit and you can see the stitching between the surfaces. That's my shit, big time. But yeah, I don't know. That's what I got.
You, Cody?
So a lot of what I will mime a lot of what Kyle mentioned. I will say a lot of those automation and sort of factory assembly line style of games that Kyle mentioned. We play together when we can cooperatively, and I think that co-op aspect is what I like and look for more than the type of game itself. So sort of at the top, maybe just cooperative games, be it something I play online with, Kyle or whomever, or play with my wife, on split screen. So I would gravitate toward a cooperative experience. I really like puzzle and logic games, like a Portal, Case of the Golden Idol, anything where you're solving mysteries. To Kyle's point, where you have to, that second screen experience, if you have to take notes or something like that's very exciting to do for a video game. Let's see. Thematically, I love pretty much anything that takes place in space. I like that is by far my most interesting sort of concept for any style of game. And then to the point Kyle brought up about comparing Avowed and Kingdom Come, I'm also playing both of those concurrently, and I've learned a lot about my tastes when it comes to open world. Obviously Avowed isn't quite open world, but to open world RPG experiences. And I'm thinking my ideal game is somewhere between those, because Kyle, you talk about all those very in-depth mechanics and then Kingdom Come.
Right.
I have pretty much modded that game to get rid of all of that.
Right.
Like when I go to do all those steps for a potion, it makes as many as I want it to make, but I don't have to do it once.
Right.
So it's somewhere in between those. And I will also say, historically, I don't love first-person games. I weirdly feel like I can empathize with the player character more when I can see their emotion versus having to feel that emotion myself. Okay. So when I am in a first person, I lose a lot of that. And that's why I personally struggle with tabletop role-playing games is because I cannot put myself in the position of the character. I need that character to experience the thing, and then I get that. So typically I like a third-person game in pretty much any genre more than I would a first-person, but Kingdom Come does have a good mix of showing you your character, but you're playing in first person. So like in dialogue and stuff, you can see your character and see how they interact and whatnot, which I think helps a lot. But yeah, as far as, I like an RPG in pretty much any setting, but I think that's sort of the core areas where I look for games.
I think it's very interesting because you guys are similar in a lot of the genres that you like, but what I hear is you like those things for very different reasons, right?
That's what it sounds
like. Kyle likes the real, like the intricacies of how the systems work and obsesses over the minutia in that. And Cody, it sounds like you're more about how do we take that minutia and automate it? How do we scale a lot of it? And like the growth trajectory in those types of games is where you find enjoyment. Whereas I am like just on the opposite side of that kind of thing. Like, I do really enjoy mechanics in games. One of the things that I have learned, because I'm also a huge sucker for story, like games that make me feel things, not even just good stories, but games that make me feel things.
You're a big feelings kind of guy.
You're Neva, Grease, like Journey, a lot of these types of games that are lighter on mechanics and gameplay and heavier, not even on like narrative or plot, but in like an emotional character journey. That shit sets me off. Gone Home. Like there are so many good examples of that. But I am discovering that if the gameplay can't hold up its end of the bargain, the narrative isn't usually enough to push me through. So I kind of sit at this balance of gameplay and story where I can enjoy a game that's a puzzle game or an action game that has no story, and I can enjoy a story-based game that doesn't have like mechanics at all. But the sweet spot for me is right in the middle there. And Cody, when you mentioned like a balance or a middle ground between Avowed and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, my middle ground is much farther to Avowed and your middle ground is much farther to Kingdom Come, because like my middle ground is a game like Skyrim where it's very approachable, it's big, it's open, but it has a lot more interactivity than a game like Avowed does, but it's missing the minutia of mechanics that something like Kingdom Come has. So it's just interesting that even you and I would agree that those two extremes are probably too extreme for us, but the middle is still pretty far apart, maybe, between the two of us.
Yeah, it's a big range.
Always fun. I think like a good thing that will come out of this is you guys are going to be much more passionate. This isn't like a broad statement definitively, right? But you guys are going to tend towards more being passionate about the inner workings maybe of a game, and I'm going to be a little bit more at like a top level. How does it make me feel? What are the characters like? And there's going to be plenty of intersect there and crossover there. But going back to what we talked about at the top, it's just a different way that we approach games, right? Like people listening or watching, you may align more with like Cody's perspective on I want to find a good balance between X and Y, Z parts versus someone that might align more with me and be like, I care more about like the characters of the game than I do the mechanics of a game. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to explore and talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
So I talked about my favorite aesthetic. I do have a quick question. In terms of cell shading, because we don't see a lot of that in games all the time. I feel like there was a moment for it, and then it kind of passed, and then every once in a while you see something crop up that uses cell shaded graphics. But like, what do you guys think is the best use of cell shaded graphics, or the game that looks the best in its cell shaded style? I'm gonna go Cody first.
Yeah, I think I'm stuck between two, and those two would be either Okami, which is a beautiful, beautiful game. That has a beautiful art and color palette on top of it being cell shaded. But it is a very good looking cell shaded game. The other one that I feel like is maybe a little not as well thought of for this question is Sly Cooper. Pretty much all those. That art in Sly Cooper looks awesome.
You're right. I didn't even think about Sly Cooper.
Yeah.
But you're 100% right.
It's a good looking game.
They need to fucking release those games again.
Straight up.
Didn't they well, they didn't like remaster them, but they did like package them, didn't they? Like on
you can
PS4,
purchase
maybe?
them on PS5. You can purchase them on PS5 digitally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think they're just like the original.
I think they're the
didn't
PS2 versions, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, Okami was one of the first games that jumps to my mind. I do feel like cell shading it doesn't have a broad definition, but it has a very broad application.
Yes, yeah,
because like
right.
there are very few games that I personally would say like are definitively cell shaded games. And I don't know that I would definitively say Okami is a cell shaded game, but it has like the harsh edges, right? Like that's kind of the what we're talking about. And similarly, a game that has a lot of those elements that is really good with color is Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. That game, I love the visual style of that game. It's so bright and cheerful and happy. It can be barren and boring also because it's a lot of water, but I do really like the visual style. To me, like the underground pick that maybe a lot of people haven't played or don't remember is Beautiful Joe. Because a lot of what I think of as cell shading is like a comic book style in motion.
Yeah.
And Beautiful Joe like is literally that. He gets like transported into like a comic book style television show or whatever it is.
Right.
And you're playing in there. And so it's got those harsh edges. It's got the pops of color and the smooth animation. Yeah, those are the three that kind of jump to my mind.
Yeah, mine was Wind Waker. That was absolutely my pick. And I love, because I remember the discourse when they first showed it off about how mad people were.
Yes.
They're like,
it's like a kid's game.
Yeah, Link's supposed to be fucking like a badass. Link's cool.
Yeah.
He's got a badass with a sword. Why is he a child? How like cold, stale ass of a take is that now, right? Like,
yes,
that game is my favorite Zelda game for sure. But and a lot of it has to do with the visual aesthetic. I talked about when I was a kid, seeing Super Mario World, those popping colors. It's the same reason why Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, those are like my favorite Pokemon games. It's not my favorite generation of Pokemon, but they are my favorite games to play because they just look so fucking good. That saturation, the colors are so great. Wind Waker jumps off the fucking screen. It looks so good. And a lot of it has to do with that art style. So, but yeah, that was my quick question.
And credit where it's due, like in terms of recent series that are kind of known for the cell shading, like Borderlands is the one that everybody's going to list. I do like the look of Borderlands.
Me
also.
too. Yeah.
I feel like it's less of an artistic approach to cell shading than the games that we've talked about, which have very unique visual styles on top of the cell shading.
Well, remember, Borderlands didn't start out with that style. The very first reveal trailer for Borderlands was like a very generic looking brown game, like all the games back then were. There's just like,
and then it came out and it was a very generic looking brown game, but everything had black edges. Yeah. I like Borderlands. I'm not trying to shit on Borderlands, but I do feel like if you mention cell shading, that's probably the game that would come to most people's minds.
The biggest cultural touch point. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. We've talked about our history. We've talked about us. We've talked about the games that we like. Let's talk about the podcast and Party Select.
That's important.
What the hell are we doing? Again, not rhetorical. What the hell are we doing?
Again, we have not talked about it.
No, we absolutely have talked about it ad nauseum for months at this point. We want to sort of set the stage for what y'all can expect. If you've been listening for an hour and a half on this podcast, and you're like, I kind of jive with these dudes. I think they're like pretty neat. I might want to engage with more of their content. What might that content be? Is the next logical question. We're here to answer it. Because this isn't actually, like, I can't actually hear you ask the question. So we have to answer questions before you even ask them.
Yeah.
It's very hard. It's hard to do.
I can hear it. You guys can't?
Yes.
No, I can also hear it.
Oh, okay. Well, then we're probably good. Yeah, we can just, like, wrap this up and
at the same time.
Okay, yeah. No. So what can folks expect from Party Select? We mentioned this main podcast, which we're calling the Flagship Podcast because it's fun. Flagship's a fun word. That is the first Monday of every month. It's going to be very long. Like this is very long. where, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about games we're playing, news, other stuff we bring to the table. That's like our monthly main thing that you're always going to get. That's going to be posted to your podcast feeds. It's going to be posted to YouTube as a video version. Love it. Subscribe, watch, and listen. We also have a thing that we're sort of carrying over from what Kyle and I were doing on the Shea It's Everything podcast, where we were doing this like retrospective look back at each year and doing like a best games and a worst games from each given year.
Right.
We're going to continue doing that type of thing. It might not be on the same cadence, but we're going to have some sort of retrospective oriented content each month. So that might be best games from 2005, or let's look at every game that came out in February of 2007. What a banger year. And there were like happened to be 4 games that were incredible. Let's do deep dives on those. It could be any kind of idea, but like retrospective content. We've also talked about doing deep dive stuff. So if we want to go back and play through the entirety of a game and then do a dedicated deep dive podcast on that game, that will exist in audio and video format. And then we're also going to do a lot of like the tier list and ranking stuff, just because it's fun. We really enjoy doing it. Kyle and I recently did a tier list of the original 151 Pokemon, which you can go see on the Shea It's Everything YouTube channel.
Based on vibes.
It was very fun to do. Based on vibes, thank you. Yes, we ranked them all based on vibes, which is the only way to rank them, frankly.
Right. Dragonite was shafted. That's all I'm saying.
See? Feedback. That's why we're bringing you into the fold. But that type of thing is always super fun to do. So we're going to do lots of tier lists, lots of rankings, just because, you know, it's a good way to like spur conversation, but it also is a good way to spur some contention, right? And some disagreement. And that's always a fun thing to do. And I guess I should also mention, we will always have dedicated like game of the year style content for a given year. So at the end of 2025, we'll have dedicated content for our favorite games, our least favorite games. We'll probably do some categories. We haven't figured that out yet, but that's like big picture what you can expect from the podcast. Before we wrap, I will tell you all literally what videos you're going to see in March from Party Select, but we'll get there. You got to listen to the end.
Yeah.
This is... It's an user retention and engagement tactic. Stay tuned to the end of the podcast to hear
don't just
about
skip ahead.
other shit you're gonna get.
Don't just. I know you have the power. I know you can, but just don't just skip ahead. Just stay here. Stay here with me.
It out. It's worth it. It's worth the wait.
I have to be here with these two for the rest of the time, so you do too.
It's the journey, not the destination. Let's like get there organically.
It's like the theme of the episode.
So beyond literally what we're doing, what we have planned, we also have big dreams. We talked about some of your guys' experience with casuals, some of Kyle and my experience with Shea It's Everything, and things that we signed up for and didn't want to do, things that we intentionally didn't sign up for. But we do have a lot of ideas for additional types of content. This is both to occasionally add to things that we're currently doing, or maybe if this grows, we will add additional things. One of the things we talked about was, you know, I look back at like Giant Bomb was a website and like a group of folks that I really loved their content, and some of the fun stuff that they used to do back in the day. I'm sure they do it now. Again, the people I liked moved on, and so I also moved on. But a lot of what they would do is like talkovers for press conferences and showcases. So like we might want to do a live stream of Summer Game Fest where you can see our live reactions and we'll chat about the stuff that's announced, the Game Awards, the PlayStation State of Plays, all that good stuff. Will just be a fun thing for us a good excuse to like bring us together, live stream it, and chat about games as they're happening.
Yeah.
And Cody, I know as we were going through the planning process, you were great at bringing like a shit ton of other game adjacent ideas and little videos we want to do or things we want to add to the flagship podcast. What are some of those examples?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, obviously some of the content is going to be both audio and visual. In fact, most of it is, but sort of these other ideas maybe down the line for the future would likely just live on the YouTube channel. And these are things like maybe quarterly or on some cadence, we might do Jeopardy. And the three of us are all contestants on a game-related Jeopardy hosted by, you know, a special guest. We might look to do sort of a grab bag of a couple different, you know, gaming-adjacent games such as like there's like Game Duel online, or like maybe a Wikipedia race where we all race from one topic to another.
Yeah.
Just sort of podcast games like that. Maybe we'd even bring back from Shea It's Everything the we'd probably hate that game, or we'd probably forget that game,
Right.
and do something in that vein in a video format. Just a bunch of like little micro based games, collaborative games to play with each other on some smaller bite-sized content that would be, like I said, living on the YouTube channel. But on top of that, I know Kyle has even brought up the potential down the road for more Let's Play or live streaming content. So Kyle, if you want to talk about that, go for it.
Yeah. We mentioned like press conference talkovers, but like if we end up growing a community, it might make sense to do live streams where we can chat with folks live and not just through the emails that y'all are sending in, or comments on the YouTube channel, now that we are doing that. So like that's certainly a thing that we are entertaining, because we have the technology. Cody, you and I have streamed before. I did quite a bit of streaming over lockdown and all that other fun stuff. So I'm familiar with how to get all that stuff rolling. I'm using OBS to record this thing right now. A little bit of inside baseball. And yeah, like I recently embarked on a quest to accumulate physical games media that I care about, and I have the means with which to stream basically any of it aside from DS and 3DS. I have a PS1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a PlayStation TV for my Vita stuff, a cord for my PSP. I can stream Xbox 360, Xbox One, Sega Genesis, Sega CD, Sega Dreamcast.
We get it. You've wasted a lot of money.
Yeah. Oh, I have an analog
so
pocket.
many stamps on his G card, man.
Yeah, dude. I have an analog pocket and a dock, so I can stream Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. And all of that stuff routes through, and I can stream all of it. It's. I'm very proud of my setup. It took me a long time and a lot of money, and it's really cool, and I like it a lot. We could potentially do something like that if they're like old franchises we're talking about, like maybe a companion video to some sort of retrospective series that we're doing. Like it could be any number of things, but just to let folks know that we have a lot of ideas floating around, but we don't want to fall afoul of our, problems we've had in the past with overcommitting and burning out and other stuff, and like recognizing that this is not a job for us. It's a thing we're doing for fun. And so it needs to stay fun and at the level that it is fun. But these are things that are floating around the brainstorming ether for us.
And certainly, like, we've got our core content that we are doing and some additive stuff that we might add over time. But also, like, we want to do what is fun for us. Like, we're not going to do a bunch of stuff that we're not passionate about to chase an algorithm or try to, like, build an audience that isn't a good fit for us. But if you're listening to this and you're enjoying it and the stuff that we're planning sounds interesting to you and you have other ideas for things that you'd like to see, even if it's just like, oh, we're doing a lot of like tier lists, and you're like, oh, you know what? I always like doing tier lists with my friends or rankings, and we talk about this thing. It'd be cool to hear you guys talk about this thing. Shoot us an email, partyselectpod@gmail.com. We would love to also integrate a lot of ideas from our community and from our viewers and listeners on top of the stuff that we've already got planned.
Yeah,
for sure. So Kyle, with all those consoles, you probably have a lot of controllers.
Dude, I have so many controllers and extension cords for those controllers.
Oh my God.
Oh man.
Guy. So with that, I have a quick question for you both, and we'll start with Shea. What is your favorite controller?
I feel like it's probably a very basic answer, like not a creative or like hot takey answer, but I probably would have to go with like the PlayStation 4 controller. I feel like it's a good balance between the like DualShock thumbstick era, and I mean I do really like the PlayStation 5 controller also, the DualSense. I think the haptic stuff is cool. I'm less passionate about the like my finger's a mouse, it's touchpad kind of thing, but the feel of it in my hands. I'm a big feel guy. You know what I mean? Feeling matters to me. I talked about this I like feelings. Yeah. It's just a good. I mean, one of those is a DualSense, though, Kyle. You got the PS5 and the PS4.
Yeah, I was showing the comparison of what you're talking about.
I gotcha. But in terms of like how it feels in my hands, I have small hands. The PlayStation 3 controller, even for me, was like kind of small, and so I think the PlayStation 4 is a really good balance. And I got to give it some credit for that.
That's good shit, man.
Get some joystick ASMR going. Clickety clickety clickety.
Oh,
you gotta oil up those thumbsticks so it's nice and smooth.
Oh, now I'm clicking them. L3, R3 to face the truth. What is that? Final Fantasy 16? Face the truth? Yeah. L3, R3 to face the truth. DualShock 4, good shout. That is my favorite Sony controller, hands down. I will say, there is a controller that is better than any Sony controller, specifically for video games for which it is designed to work for. And that is the GameCube controller.
Oh, that's not where I thought you were going. I thought you were going the Resident Evil 4 chainsaw controller.
Oh, well, look, I can go pick that up right now. It's on the shelf directly above my head. Yeah, the Resident Evil 4 GameCube controller is maybe the worst controller I own. Yeah, okay, no. But the GameCube controller it fits my hands the best of any controller. It is bad for a whole slew of genres of video games, but for the games in which it works really well, which are most GameCube games, it's my favorite controller. Specifically the Spice Orange. That is the best.
And that makes a difference.
That's the best of the best.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's a bad controller, but I am also a defender of it.
Yeah,
I like the GameCube controller.
It is a bad controller,
a mess.
But it's my favorite controller.
Yeah.
Interesting that you both prefer the PS4, which I think the DualSense 4 is totally fine, or the DualShock 4 is totally fine. If I'm playing any game, I want to be using the DualSense though. It's the only thing I use on PC. There's a weight to it that I really like. It just feels right. And conversely, it's so much easier to use, but I loathe the Xbox controller. I always have. I've never enjoyed the layout, the feel, the hand feel of that controller.
The sticks are wrong. They're just wrong.
Yeah. And because it's batteries, they're still fucking using batteries, which is just insane.
Yes,
I bought rechargeable batteries specifically because of the Xbox controller, and I was very angry to have to do that.
Also, the L1R1 on an Xbox controller, that ain't it.
Not nearly as good.
That ain't it.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. Because I was going to come to the defense, because I think the big picture is like gaming controllers have become commoditized in a way that they're all good now. Like even the Pro controller for the Switch is like a good controller. It's totally fine. Actually, maybe that's not true. This version of the Switch controller, I think, is actually kind of dog shit. There's your Resident Evil 4 controller. Head to the YouTube channel to see the Resident Evil 4 chainsaw controller. But yeah, I think because I like the new Xbox controller fine. The 360 controller was also good. I think most between Xbox and Sony, they've all been good for a decade plus.
Yeah.
But to me, the DualShock 4 is the champ. Although I don't blame you at all for the DualSense. I maybe just have, which is weird to say, some nostalgia for the DualShock 4.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's not that long ago, but I still have nostalgia for it.
I have two other answers for this. They're more jokey, but also pretty serious. Kyle, going off of your answer, it's just the better GameCube controller is the Wavebird because it's wireless. I mean, the Wavebird is awesome. Yeah. It was so cool. It was the coveted controller of its time.
When people got together to play Smash, the person who owned the console was the one with the Wavebird.
Oh yeah. Yep. And then, it's not maybe the first thing you think of when you think of a controller, but specifically the Guitar Hero 3 Les Paul Xbox 360
interesting
guitar.
I was
Kyle's fighting the urge to go get his.
It's across the house. I both the two that I own are across the house in the closet.
It's too far to go.
It's too far.
I think my real answer which unfortunately is the controller that never was. But I do think it would have been
The boomerang.
the greatest controller of all time. Thank you for spoiling the joke, Kyle. It's the PS3 boomerang controller.
Some would
That's
say the seeds were sown and they grew and grew into the DualSense 5 because it contains echoes of the boomerang handles.
I could see that. It is more sharp.
Yes,
Than
it's
like
the
DualShock 4
batarang
is.
of the boomerang controllers.
And that's partially why I like the DualShock 4 more, is it's rounded. That's
Yeah.
what I liked about the PS3 version also.
It's
The
round.
DualSense is good,
Yeah.
but the angle, I'm less passionate about.
I don't care about the angle either.
Great question.
Yeah.
Great question.
Hey, thanks.
You know what? Okay,
Very
one
contentious
final thought.
opinions.
I have one final
Uh-huh.
thought. The Dreamcast controller with the VMU. The VMU,
Yeah.
like criminally underutilized, very interesting piece of technology, especially
cool.
for the time. You could take a VMU and plug it into another VMU and do like little games. How weird is that?
Huh.
Yeah. And
Sega was just
some of
doing stuff. The fucking okay, dude. The Sega CD, bro. Can we talk about the Sega CD for a second?
we can't. No.
All right, fine.
No, we can. What?
You fucking take a Genesis and you bolt it onto the Sega CD, and that's how you have another console. And then you can take the 32X expansion thing and then just plop that in there and then put your like Sonic and Knuckles expansion card into the 32X expansion and then put Sonic 2 in there and also play as Knuckles.
Yeah, it was terrible.
It was just
It was
like, you're just
horrible.
like bolting shit onto shit. Sega was cool,
Yeah.
man.
Like
Sega
those
used
are
to be
horrendous.
cool.
No, that's not cool. That's a horrendous user experience, and it's why they failed
No,
as
it's awesome.
as a console maker. It's not awesome.
The
It's
PlayStation
say-
5 should have been something you bolted onto your PS4.
Attaching like utilitarian, I don't even know if that's the right word, pieces to your console is a cool thing.
Yeah.
Like the Game Boy
It's just
Advance
awesome.
player for GameCube. Just
Yeah.
In the
locking that thing
90s.
up there.
No,
in the
today.
90s when everything was terrible. Like this is some like Galactic Empire era bullshit. Give me Old Republic, smooth lines, comfort, class. You like the rusty garbage.
Yeah, the superior aesthetic.
That is some fascist ass video game console shit.
No,
That's
dude.
what that is.
That's the fucking rebellion, bro. We're scrappy. We make do with what we have. We bolt shit onto shit. You think the fucking Millennium Falcon was stock?
See, but the difference
not.
is that like Sega's charging you money to bolt shit on other shit. You're not hacking anything. You're not undermining the system by putting this stuff together. They're selling you a shitty product, and you're just like, yes, give me more. I will attach it to my other box.
Dude, that's me right there. That's a perfect impersonation. Shit, you got me. Cold.
With all of that being said, that's our podcast. That is episode
already.
0 of Party Select. I promised this, and so we're going to do it. What are we doing in March?
Right. We got
So this episode is going out late February as a tease, as a setup, as an RSS feed builder, with our actual first episode of the podcast launching the first Monday of March. A couple of days after that, we are going to have a very special thing that we actually recorded about a month ago. We did a fantasy critic draft.
Yeah.
Kyle, do you want to describe what that is?
It's like fantasy football for video games, where
Yes.
Shea, Cody, and I each made a fake video game publisher, and we drafted video games onto our publisher. And as they come out, and as Open Critic scores are released for those video games, we will get points. And like we're gonna be checking in with those because it's ever evolving. You know, like a game could review really well when it comes out, and then it's like a live service game and they screw something up down the road, and so their review scores tank over time. All of that's factored in, like the score closing happens at the end of the year. halfway through the year, we have like some pickups where we're going to get some additional video games that we didn't have on our lists from the start. And every month on the main flagship podcast, we're going to have check-ins for how are our lists doing, and what games have come out, who's currently in the lead and that kind of stuff. We'll be checking in on that. So yeah, that's just like a cool, fun thing that we decided to do.
Yeah. And, normally we would want to have recorded and published that like maybe in December, or if not January at the beginning of the year. Party Select didn't exist.
Yeah,
we did it a little bit later, but we did record it back in like early February. And so that episode will come out after episode 1 of the main podcast. And that'll just be fun because many of the games that we drafted have already come out, even at the time of this recording. So we kind of already know retroactively some of the pros and the cons that we've done there. Yeah. But that, like Kyle said, that'll be a really fun one to check in on throughout the year. In the middle of the month, we are going to do sort of our retrospective for this month is going to be the best games of the 90s. So back with Shea, It's Everything, Kyle and I did a top 5 games. We started in 1995, so we did 95 through 99. So we're adding Cody's perspective, and we're adding all the games that came out in 90 through 94. And we're going to have a big list of all of our nominees, and we're going to whittle that down to a top 10 games of the 90s.
Yeah.
That was going to be very, very difficult because there are a lot of fucking bangers in the 90s. So that'll be a very fun one.
Horror games.
That will not be on the top 10. But that'll be a fun one, that'll be available as a podcast, but it will also be really good as a video podcast so you can kind of see our organization and kind of follow along. And then towards the end of March, we're going to be doing our tier list, which for March is going to be coolest looking video game consoles. Guess what? The Sega CD ain't gonna be high on that tier list. But that's every video game console and every like iteration that is meaningfully different. And this is purely based on the look of the console.
Yeah.
We're not talking about like which has the best game library. That might be a tier list for the future. But we're talking like the PSX versus the PSX Mini, right? Big tier list. That's going to be a really fun one. There are a lot of video game consoles.
Yes.
We're discovering in prep for this. But that'll be really fun. So that'll be towards the end of March. And then that's the rotation, baby. Beginning of April, flagship podcast. We're going to be doing some kind of retrospective, some kind of tier list. And we'll continue to grow and do new things as we go. I think there's a Ben Platt song that has that as lyrics. But yeah, that's it. That's what you can expect in March. And that's the end of the podcast.
Wow.
Thank you, Kyle, Cody. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, viewers.
Yeah.
If you have not already and you want to add yourself to the party,
hell yeah,
our party, you can subscribe. Subscribe on your podcast service, your Spotify, your Apple Podcasts, wherever it might be. Subscribe on YouTube to get some of that video goodness, like the tier list for our video game consoles. That's going to be a YouTube exclusive, baby.
Ooh.
Because that's not going to be fun to like listen to us talk about how things look unless you can see the pictures of the things. Like, use your brains. Come on.
That's right.
So make sure you subscribe on YouTube also. Write us an email, partyselectpod@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Feedback on what we've got planned. Don't write us in and be like, you guys sound ugly. Because you can just go to YouTube and look at us, and then you'll know that. You don't need to email us about an assumption, right? Yeah. But other things you can email us. Leave us a comment on YouTube. Write us a review on your podcast service. Leave us a rating. And the most important thing you can do if you want to help Party Select grow is tell your friends. I mean that with true sincerity. I check out new things based on the recommendations of my friends.
Yeah.
And I imagine you all do too. We're not going to show up in an algorithm. Who gives a shit about us?
Not me.
You all do. Maybe.
I care about you guys.
Yeah, but you're on the podcast now, so you can't be a
count.
listener anymore.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. You're not a person.
That's it. We will see you all back in just a few short days for episode 1, and then tons of shit for years after that until we die, bro.
Hell yeah.
It's going to be awesome. We love video games. We love you. Peace out.